Good afternoon, everybody. Keith here. Hoping everybody's having a good day, enjoying life, living life, loving life. Let's take that off. Got some questions we're going to answer today. I've been doing a lot of videos and posting a lot of things that are on my mind. And so I wanted to find out what's on everybody else's mind. And basically it's pretty much what I figured and have figured for quite a while. And it all comes down to truth. But in regards to the questions that were asked, if you look at the top of the post, you'll see I got 3 guys that wanted 3 different subjects discussed. And actually there's 4 within their 3 questions. And all of them are basically the same question. And that might be confusing to a lot of you, so we're going to start out with the first part of it, and that is banking. Well, let's think about banking. What is banking? Well, the first thing I'm going to tell you is we have to remember Bill Clinton was put on the stand one time, and when asked a particular question, his response, his ability to respond, because he was capable of understanding exactly what the question was, he came back with, well, that would depend on what your definition of the word is. So let's talk about the definition of bank. How many definitions of banks are they, and where do they originate? I always talk about etiology, etymology, and epistemology. Root cause, root word, and root knowledge. So let's go back to the beginning. What is a bank? Well, when we think about the laws and everything that we have nowadays and how everything is admiralty maritime. What is admiralty? Admiralty is the law of the sea. Maritime is the contract of man that is transported by sea. Okay? So everything has to do with water in regards to today's commercial society, and that water is a form of transportation, and that transportation needs ports, and those ports have been moved inland to dry dock. So now we have banks across dry land. This is your banking today. Because banks originally were banks where current flowed, currents of energy. And understand, people, the original Phoenician definition of water is electromagnetic energy. So when that water, just merely by moving from point A to point B and frictioning across each molecule and transferring electrons from one point to another as it goes, that is electric current in a fluid motion that is visual. And we see it within banks. We also have an electric current that we devised on electronic circuit boards that is also visual in a sense, because we know the path we want it to take, so we construct that path, but we cannot see the actual flow unless we hook it up to another electronical monitoring device that uses that to show us in a picture of a graph. So we have all kinds of banks. Well, what are banks? Banks are borders. Banks are jurisdictional borders of that energy. So what really is the definition of the word is? What really is the definition of the word bank? Imagine that. They all correlate. And the only thing you have to do is get back down to the origin. I'm going to get a little bit closer. So when we think about the word bank, we have to think about, okay, we got to go outside. Yeah, reception and everything's on my end. I'm going to try to keep my microphone uncovered so everybody can hear me. And so let's talk about this thing with banks again. When we talk about banks, we have to get down to the origin of the word itself, the origin of the symbols that made that word, the boundaries, the jurisdiction that it's in, the jurisdiction of those symbols. Whose symbols are they? Where do they derive from? Do they derive from another person's mind, or are they deriving from your own? And that derivation from your mind, is it based on multiple descriptions, which are all just another man's definition? Or are they based on your definition? Okay? So when we ask questions about banks, irrevocable trusts, shipping, and judicial misconduct, I want everybody to understand that every last one of it, every last bit of it, has to do with a jurisdictional issue of what energy is being projected. Okay? Is it your energy? Is it the natural energy that you receive from your surroundings? Or is it some fictional energy that somebody else portrayed through a dead writing that no longer has any vibration except what they put out through a piece of paper? And that vibration is one movement of the piece of paper from them to you. Now, are you going to transfer that vibration back and then have them hand it back? Are you going to keep that vibration going as a negative energy? Or are you going to get rid of it, hand it back, say, no thanks, I don't want your ball, it's not my game? So, again, back to the bank. When we think about bank, today we're talking about a transportation of jurisdiction of your energy, period. You go out and you work your ass off all day long to make these Federal Reserve notes to save up in a bank that has no energy and can't pass any energy unless you allow it to. And it's all a matter of financial transactions, which is just merely energy vibrations. And they define them as commercial production. They define it as transportation, trade, traffic. It's all just a movement. And we all have a freedom of movement. And it all depends on what we flow in. What energy are we going to flow in? Are we going to restrict ourselves to this admiralty jurisdiction of the water? Are we going to figure out that the jurisdiction of the land and the jurisdiction of the water both need the jurisdiction of the air? And it's all an energy together, and that none of it survives without the other? You're not going to have a landmass without that has any kind of actual energy unless you have water and air along with it. And these are the banks. These are the jurisdictions that confine you. So it again depends on what your definition of bank is in regards to your question. But I understand your question. Want to talk about banking, so let's talk about banking in all aspects. The banking that we're doing today is just that. We're handing over our energy to a public bank, for a public service that operates privately and then consume your energy all through a fiction. And yet you have this ability, if it's a public bank, don't you have a right to have access to information and knowledge about private banks? And I think that's what you need to start doing is looking up information on private banks. Because once you find out, like I have, that there really is no need for banks at all, that there really is no need for irrevocable trust, let alone any other kind of trust, because there is a pure trust that's already developed. You've already been given use of everything freely. You can't be charged for it. There is no such thing as debt in a pure trust. The trust that is a reality. So who are you going to trust? You're going to trust a bank? You're going to trust somebody else to handle your financial situations? You're going to trust somebody else to transport you from point A to point B? Or are you going to take it upon your own definition of your own movement and what refines you and defines you? And say, fuck everybody else. You can't put that, you can't put that illusion on me. I live in a reality that only exists here. Now, if you want to know what exists here, you have to understand my intent. In order for me to convey my intent, you have to back off with your assertion that I have to listen to you first. I don't. I don't. I listen to the voice of truth first. Anything that's said beyond that, it better be done with an intent first. And that intent must be portrayed first. And so when we think about these irrevocable trusts, common law trusts, these perfected trusts, every last one of them, and again, I'm going to show you the point of reality, every last one of them can only be constructed first by conveying the intent of that trust. So even these trusts that you write down have to be based on a voice of truth. If that trust doesn't declare its intent, then it's not a trust. Okay, then it has to have identifiable and identified parts. Well, what are parts? Today we think about that as in parties. And the parts are the trustor, the trustee, and the beneficiary. And of course, the uses defined by those parts therein define the property or the body of the trust. And see, I myself, you right there, each and every last one of you, you're the body of the original trust. And if you turn around and you look at somebody else and you accept their body of trust without knowing the intent, it may have a body, but the intent's wrong. So is it really a trust? Think about this stuff. Now the next thing about a trust is we hear a trust does not fail for want of a trustee. Well, what does that mean? Well, if you have three parties to a trust and you have one trust without a trustee, that's two parties. Well, that means at least those two parties have to come to a meeting of minds. And therefore, that's a contract. Contract, two. What are we dealing with today? Contracts and trusts. Well, what are they? Well, everybody wants to define a contract as a meeting of minds. That the parties have to come to a meeting of minds and make agreements along the way, amending those agreements back and forth, communicating back and forth, passing this piece of paper from one place to the next. And if there are three parties, then it goes from truster to trustee to trustee to beneficiary. All parties have to know this. But today's trust, we design them particularly on the original when we're born in a hospital. Let's start there. And they developed this original statement of live birth, this hospital statement of live birth, and then they hand it over to another party. That party knows what's going on. The hospital doctor doesn't, the mother doesn't, the beneficiary doesn't. Is it really a trust? Think about this. Every trust must have bodies, at least one body. And if they're dependent on the property of that trust, of consideration in that trust, to be Federal Reserve notes handed down from the IMF, which is assigned by the birth number on that original statement of live birth, constructing a financial instrument that we call a trust or a contract or an agreement. Does it really have a body? Not if that Federal Reserve note has no value. A trust can't exist without a body. So the papers that were put down by a foreign body that suggest your body is the body of the trust, is that really a trust? The entire financial banking system we have today throughout the world is all built on fraud. And that's why they're taking out the central banks of countries like Iran, Venezuela. You think this shit going down in Venezuela is because of the people's problem or some kind of electrical issue because of the generators going down or some kind of bullshit like? No, it's because they had a central bank and ran their own currency, and now they're going to devastate them so horrifically that they're going to be dependent upon some other body in order to survive in a commercial system. Otherwise, they have to retrograde and go back to an original or a prior source or a prior point in time and start behaving like real men and surviving without a financial banking fraud. And most people don't want to do that. I have no problem with it. That's why I gave it up. But again, like I said, most people can't do that, particularly in an entire country like Venezuela or Iran. So there are times where we come to a point where we have to raise our arms and depend on that Second Amendment right, or the right that's portrayed, enumerated in the Constitution. See, those are just enumerated. They're not limited by any scope. Like I said, a word defined is just another man's definition. When it comes to your right to bear arms, understand my definition of right to bear arms doesn't come original from the right to raise a gun. It comes originally from my right to an armorial bearing. Armorial bearing. Not a right to bear arms. See, they twist everything up, and that's why I keep telling everybody everything's backwards. And so I really hope everybody thinks about this. So let's get back to the irrevocable trust and understand that irrevocable trust in today's society, we're talking about something where the beneficiary is actually the authoritative party now. Because not only has the beneficial use been transported, but the property itself has been transported, as well as the right to administrate that property has been transported. It has been done through, and this is, I'll give you an example. An irrevocable trust is, say, Grandpa decides that he's got an old farm truck that he wants to hand down to his granddaughter for her use so that she can learn how to travel around the world. And at the point in time that she's at now, she's still a minor. So financial responsibilities in regards to insurances and stuff like that, bonds, I suggest private surety bonds, keep everything on the private rather than going through driver license and public insurance and all that. But it depends on how you write it up as far as the transfer, what her responsibilities are in maintaining that. But if she's a minor, she can't take those responsibilities, so mom's got to take care of them, mom and dad. So you transfer those responsibilities to mom and dad as trustees. Okay? And then when that granddaughter becomes age of majority and can take responsibility for herself, there no longer needs to be a trustee. So there is still a trust, but a trust does not fail for want of trustee. So there's still a trust. Well, what is that trust now without a trustee? What did I tell you? It's a contract. Well, what's the contract? Now that the granddaughter has reached age of majority, it's finalized. It's satisfied. And therefore, it is no more trust. And therefore, it's just finalized. How can you revoke something that's no longer in existence? Proof is on the record. It's no longer a trust. It's no longer a contract. It's been finalized. There's an element of time and requirements that have been finalized. The will of the trust has been probated. And this is what's happening in these courts. They're acting as banks. And remember, banks can operate as trust companies. And when they have access to your Social Security account, which is the trust, and all personal bank accounts are dependent upon a provision of a Social Security number so that they can act as a trust company when you don't operate or administrate that account according to their legal system. If you don't know the rules, then they will follow those rules for you, and they don't need to tell you. They're assuming you're beneficiary and that you're never going to reach age of majority because you're 52 years old and ain't claimed it yet. Well, he must be an idiot. He must be incompetent. So now let's talk about shipping. Like I said, back to the banks. You all ask the same question. What's shipping? Shipping is transportation. What's transportation? Every last bit of it has to do with commerce. That's why if you look up the definition of transportation or commerce in the Commerce Code, and you find out it says that commerce is commerce, transportation, traffic, and trade. Well, what are those? Those are 4 different jurisdictions using 4 different words for the same definition. You got trade, which is international. You got International Trade and Commerce Commission, International Trade and Commerce laws. And you got traffic. Everybody gets traffic citations from the state. Then you got transportation, which is federal code. Then you got commerce, which is the intermix of all 3 of those jurisdictional elements, borders, by combining the bank into one bank to work through all 3 jurisdictions. And that's your IMF. That's commerce, and it's all fraud. You all have the right to transport your own property. You all have the right to perform traffic within your own state national capacity. You all have the right to trade from one person to another. And those are all supposed to be equal and fair exchanges that come to a meeting of the minds. That's banking. Right there. That's shipping. That's transportation. That's irrevocable trust. And when it comes to administrating any judicial power, they all get their power from yourself. Who gets your power, who yourself get your power from a higher power. And it's called free will. You know? Now, if your free will is of good intent, good faith and fair dealing, then it's built on a trust. That if the bank overflows, if the currency overflows, that energy will be accepted graciously for good intent. Because when you call it a flood, and start building all these artificial banks on the natural rivers. And you end up with record rain and snowfall. And the whole state ends up flooded. Is it destroying things? Is the after effect causing you problems? Is it causing real life problems? Or is it cleaning out the rivers and helping clear out all the rubbish that you throw along the rivers? And all your brush piles that you use or that you set along the rivers when you clear the land. What are you doing about banks? Are you not using the right ones? Are you using the wrong ones? Are you using the true ones the wrong way? It comes down to your definitions, people. I can talk about anything you want all day long. But I assure you, it's all the same problem. You. What's your intent? If your intent is truly good. And again, like I said, I know a lot of people can't do what I'm doing. Can't just quit banking. You have families that are dependent upon yourself. But when it comes to this financial system and all these different styles of banks, what is it you're doing about these different banks? If you have a personal banking account, are you maintaining a personal banking account? Understand, if you're maintaining a personal banking account, that personal banking account is a person's bank account. Person? No. They put a suffix on the word person. So it's done something. It's transformed that word person. Find out how it transformed that person. Okay? That personal bank account means it's still a person. Whose person is it? So there's the first step in your personal banking problems. Figure out whose person it really is. If it's not your person, then why are you operating their personal bank account? I might have covered my mic there. I came inside and moved my hand. Anyway, so when it comes to these personal bank accounts, is it a personal bank account you want or a private bank account? Well, when it comes to these personal private bank accounts, do you really want a public bank or a private bank? When it comes to the public banks and private banks, do you really want a bank? Or do you just want to manage your own financial transactions, your own goddamn self? Well, when it comes to private banks, public banks, and financial transactions, do you really need financial transactions? Do you really need a slip of paper? Do you really need to lower your vibration to death so that it goes on somebody else's ledger? What's a ledger? When I pass on, don't bury me in the ground and put a ledger over my grave so that you can then put a graven image on top in a stone figure with that all caps fucking name. Let me die in peace. I want nothing to do with your ledger and graven images. See, that's how that part works. See, they put a ledger on your grave, and then they put an image of the all caps name. So who are you really banking with? What waters are you fishing? What waters are you fishing? Are you being prosperous and abundant? Taking what was freely given and freely giving back what was freely given? So that when you're done with that fish carcass and you got one piece, do you throw it in the trash and disposition it to a dumpster so that the dumpster can The garbage guys can come collect it and put it in this mass pile where the only thing that gets to it is the bugs. And that's only after a long period of time because you done wrapped it in plastic. Or you take it back down to the river and throw it in the river so the critters down there can finish it off naturally. What kind of banks are you maintaining? What kind of banks do you trust? I trust natural banks, whether they flood or not. I know how to respond to that. All this fish kennel banking, I don't know how to respond to it. I'm incapable. I'm incompetent. I'm an idiot. Anyway, I hope everybody understands this. It's all the same. When it comes to shipping, they're just transporting. When it comes to banks, they're just transporting. When it comes to trusts, they're just transporting. When it comes to the judicial misconduct, they're just transporting. Every last bit of it is transportation, traffic, trade, commerce, and you need to start taking care of that stuff yourself naturally. And again, like I said, when it comes to this commercial system and using their banks, figure out how to best use them so you can eventually quit having to use them and become self-governing with your family. There's all kinds of communities out there starting up and growing that exist without any kind of commerce. They work collectively, and I know a lot of people are afraid of things like that because you hear of programs like, or situations like that, like Waco, and people like Randy Weaver that just wanted to be let alone and went off and lived by themselves. So either whether you do it in groups or whether you do it as a single family, it's still dangerous. But that's life. And the only way we can prove the reality of life is by doing the real things. If we continue maintaining the fiction is going to kill you. And then you're going to be buried in a box. Just like you've lived in a box all your life. All your life they got you living in a box. And then they're going to bury you in a box. And they're going to continue the ledger eternally by putting a ledger on top of your grave and placing an image on top of that. So everybody can see how you did your banking. It's a debt stone. So they can look you up and see the information on record. You want to list me anywhere, you list me grammatically correct in a nice memory book. That's all I need. That's what I'm told. Eternal life. Eternal life. As long as I keep taking what was freely given and passing it on, that's eternal life. The spirit, the intent. And if it's done with good intent, it should be eternal life. That's the love. You have infamous people and you have famous people. We tend to think of famous people as people that will be remembered forever, like Jesus, Michael Jackson, Elton John, JFK, MLK. What are we reducing them to when we start calling them JFK and MLK? What about people that are remembered like Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn? What about people like Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn? Are they people or are they persons? Are they abstract nouns? Are they proper nouns? Are they concrete nouns? What the fuck are they? What is the intent? Anyway, my battery's getting low again. I'm glad you guys posted those questions. I'm going to go back through it and see if I can come up with some more subjects. A lot of people spoke on a lot of things. I did notice a couple people said something about living off the grid. And as I just mentioned, there's communities that do that. that live off the grid and they use the resources provided. They still have to deal financially in certain aspects with outside foreign entities in order to provide things like solar panels and piping and things like that. But as we grow in those kind of communities, we'll be able to do that kind of stuff ourselves.
Yes.
And become more and more dependent. And that's why I say it's a matter of learning the banking system that you're using to be able to use it properly by finding out their true intent in every word that they use. Every word, term, condition, concept, ideal, everything. It all has to do with commerce, transportation, traffic. Okay, anyway, it all has to do with commerce, transportation, traffic, and trade. And every last one of them's the same. They all mean bank. They all mean jurisdiction. They all mean conveyance. They all mean, hold on, I'll be right back.